Hey, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
All is well, all is well. Thank you so much for coming on the platform. I truly appreciate you. This is definitely an honor.
Sure. I'm sure it will be a delight.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Just to give you a heads up, I'm currently in Ghana, so sometimes we're not as technologically advanced. So if it's a little delay, I'll hop right back in. Okay, now let me see. For the viewers who may not recognize you, could you let them know who you are and definitely where you're from?
All right. I am Michael Graziano. I am a professor of neuroscience and psychology at Princeton University. And these days, I study the brain basis of consciousness.
Wow, that's real cool. That's real cool. Now I can ask you this. When did you kind of develop a passion for that? Was that something you got into early on or later in life?
Well, I think studying neuroscience, I was very interested in early. I had a lot of different interests. It took me a while. I explored, like everyone does this and that. And I tried music as a path. I tried physics as a path, but no, it was neuroscience that really got me interested. Most of my career as a neuroscientist, I studied very basic issues, nuts and bolts issues like how the brain processes sensory input or how it controls movement. And so it's really only in the last 15 years that I got into this particular topic, how the brain, in effect, builds models of itself, how it understands itself. In other words, consciousness.
Wow, okay, okay. Now I can ask you, now what exactly is psychology and neuroscience? Those are some big terms to a lot of people because when I think of psychology, I'm thinking about stress, depression, anxiety. Is it something totally different or is it connected to that?
Oh, it's connected. Psychology is huge. It covers lots and lots of different sub areas. And what you're talking about is really clinical psychology. And I have not studied that very much, although in some ways it comes in now and then and is relevant to the work I do. But psychology can also be how people learn, how people process information. It can be memory, it can be decision making, all these processes going on that you study in people. And neuroscience is when you take your studies into the brain and you try to understand the wiring and the networks and how neurons communicate with each other. And basically, when you try to understand the biological machinery that lies behind the psychology.
Okay, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you breaking that down. Now I can ask you this. Now you had mentioned you're a professor at Princeton, but you also attended Princeton. So you've been there for a few decades now. What was that journey like?
Well, it was a very strange journey, I guess. I was there as an undergrad starting in 1985, and I began as a physics major and pursued that for a while, and it was okay. I pursued music for a while, and Princeton has a very good music department. It was okay, and I studied creative writing for a while. I tried a lot of different things, and um, found neuroscience toward the end of my undergraduate career and really began to get into it. And the reason I think for me is that neuroscience was still is a really young field. So everywhere you go, you see a mystery and you see questions, nobody knows the answers to them. And you can walk into a lab and right away you're studying new things and discovering new things. And that's fantastic. And, in physics, for example, that's not the case. It takes forever to learn the 500 years of basics before you start getting to the cutting edge stuff. So I really enjoyed the neuroscience, and I went to graduate school in neuroscience. I was at MIT for 2 years, but I just really liked Princeton, so I came right back, and I've been here ever since in one capacity or another. Now as a professor.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. Because, like you say, you started in 85, the 90s, the 2000s to be able to, consistently be at Princeton. That's amazing. Now, I wanted to ask you, I see the keyboard in the back. You had mentioned that you are a composer. Did you learn how to play when you were younger?
Yes, yeah. So I was, and still am very much into music. I studied composition in high school and college. Again, there was a brief period when I was a music major. Uh, and yeah, I have a YouTube channel with my music on it. If anyone wants to check it out, it's a tutorial channel on how to handle orchestras and orchestra instruments.
Wow, wow, that's amazing. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and we have. Are you familiar with the Cleveland Orchestra?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, yeah, I had to represent. Now I want to ask you about this. Now, what exactly is consciousness like in today's, I guess, or at least amongst my peers, when people say conscious, they may say, well, he's a conscious rapper. He's making music about political things or social things or, relevant things. Or you might say this person is a part of the conscious community. They look into things that they're eating or things that they're consuming or watching or put into their body. But in the science world, what does that really mean?
Right. So the word consciousness keeps changing meaning over time. And that's exactly right what you said. One of the meanings that's beginning to emerge, the way people use the word, is very often like a community of people who are invested in some, set of ideas, and so politically conscious or health conscious. But where it really starts, you go back about 100 years, and people are talking about the mind and the stream of consciousness. And the stream of consciousness is all the stuff in your mind, all the memories playing at the moment, all the sensory impressions, the emotions, the decisions, the internal dialogue. All of that is the stuff in your mind. That's the stream of consciousness. That's how people thought about it maybe 100 years ago. Um, at some point, a kind of interesting change happened. I think it's because of the rise of computer technology that uh, people began to realize that, wait, a lot of these things that are normally in the conscious mind, computers can do, right? So computers have memory and they can make decisions. They can decide whether to do A or B. um, Computers can take in information, hook a camera to it. It can take in visual information and process it. So it's got a kind of sensory component. All these components, all these things people once thought of as consciousness, suddenly artificial systems were doing. And I think what happened somewhere in the second half of the 20th century, people felt kind of threatened by that, and they began to devise a new way to think about consciousness. And that new way is it's not, consciousness is not the content, it's not the memories anymore. That's not how people think of it anymore, at least in my field. It's not the decision making, it's not the sensory impressions. Those are the things that are in consciousness. But the consciousness itself is experience. It's like the essence of experience. It's a kind of intangible feel that you have when you're thinking or processing or remembering. So that became the idea of consciousness. Probably the most famous description of that is the so-called hard problem. The hard problem of consciousness. That what that means is the intangible, non-physical feel inside your head. And that's how a lot of people, a lot of philosophers, and a lot of scientists began to think about consciousness. And I think a lot of people still do. So that's probably the best current description of consciousness right now that most people use is experience, subjective experience itself.
Okay, okay. Now I can ask you this. Um, Say, has there been any changes in the level of consciousness of humans? Say, if we go back 50 years or 100 years or 10,000 years, and in conjunction with the the growth of technology. You know, we got so many gadgets and different things that affect our consciousness as well.
Well, probably not. So the the things we are conscious of, that changes all the time, right? Obviously, our world is different now, so we're very different, immersed in a different set of issues and a different set of experiences every day. But the ability to have an experience, the ability to have a conscious experience, that machinery in the head that gives us that is probably the same throughout all of human history. It's probably present in a lot of non-human animals as well. So, most mammals, like your dog and your cat and so on, they probably have the same ability. They're conscious of different things. Like your cat's not going around thinking about, the internet or how to go to a store and buy stuff. It's conscious of very different things, but it has subjective experience. And so that essence, that subjective experience, that's what so many people are interested in studying. What are the systems? Uh, can you build it artificially? Do computers does Chat GPT have this? Probably not, but maybe the next generation would. What is it? What is the mechanism that gives a person a subjective feel on the inside?
Wow. Okay. Okay. Yeah, but I'm not sure if it's related. But you had mentioned animals. I know typically we might think of like a dog or a cat, but I started an urban garden like 2 years ago, and I had ordered some chickens. I only had three of them, but to make a long story short, one of the chickens died, and the other chickens they was looking for the chicken. I could tell they mood changed. They were sad. They didn't want to eat. But that's something that I never even considered that they would even care about or realize. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So there are different opinions and different theories that give different answers. My best guess, based on the kinds of theories that I work on regarding consciousness, my best guess is that what we think of as consciousness, a conscious mind, the ability to really feel, feel and experience, probably evolved quite a long time ago. It's probably present in birds like your chickens and mammals. Um, and these branches separated quite a long time ago, 200, 250 million years ago. And so it's probably around there. There may even be some reptiles that have some of this. So I'm guessing it's probably in that domain that you have what we think of as consciousness. So that's a lot of animals.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Now I wanted to ask you about some of the novels that you have written.
Sure.
If you could, yeah, yeah. How many have you written so far?
Well, I have, let's see, good question. I have three novels published that are more for, I don't know, an adult audience, or kind of, more on the literary end, I guess you would say. I have three written for kids, probably like, 10-year-old range. And then, that's the ones that are published. Of course, one writes many, many more than ever get published. But yeah, so those are the six that I published: three for kids, three for adults.
Okay, okay. I wanted to ask you about them. Like, okay, you have God, soul, mind, brain, consciousness, and the social brain, rethinking consciousness, three perspectives, spiritual, the hard problem, and self model. So now, consciousness in conjunction with the book that you have, God, soul, mind, and brain. Is that a part of consciousness? Is that scientific, or what have you
Right.
found from your
So
research?
right. So just to clarify, the books you just mentioned are actually not, not novels. They're books on the science, right? So I write science books for the general public. I've also written these stories, these novels that you mentioned, but we'll put those aside for the moment. We'll come back to the science. Yes, the first book I wrote related to consciousness, that was 2010. That was the book God, Soul, Mind, Brain. And the idea was these concepts kind of stepping down from the most abstract the God concept down to the most concrete and physical, the brain, and how do you connect one to the other. Um, and what the book is about essentially is, in a nutshell, people evolved to be social. We're very social animals. And so one of the things we do is we look at other people and we see mind in them, we see consciousness in them. We have to. I mean, our brains have specialized machinery that allows us to look at another person and say, ooh, I can kind of see the mind and the thoughts and the emotions churning away in that person. We're built that way. um, and because we do that, that's really the basis of our um, spiritual impulses, because people are doing the same thing, attributing minds and consciousness to everything around them, right? And so you have this whole world of perceived spirit and mind all around us. And the argument in the book is this is essentially generated by the social machinery in the brain that's projecting these kinds of minds onto people and onto animals and onto objects and onto empty spaces and so on. So that's kind of the concept of that book.
Oh, okay. Wow, I'm gonna have to check that out. That's deep. Now you wrote I guess maybe it was like a paper. This was in 2022. The origin of smiling, laughing, and crying. I thought that was pretty interesting. Could you speak on that a little bit?
Sure. So this is a very different topic. Um, one of the things I studied earlier, before I ever got to the topic of consciousness, was movement control, and in particular, the interaction between sensory input and movement control. And one of the things we discovered is there's parts of the brain, a whole system in the brain, all parts all hooked together in a big system that processes objects that are threatening to the body, and they produce defensive movements. So, like a bee flies at your face and you kind of go like that. That's a defensive movement. Um, or you're, I don't know, in a fight and somebody hits you and your face reacts as the fist is looming at you. And you're like squinting. And um, even just walking through a doorway, you tend to adjust your posture so that you're not going to whack yourself on the door frame. So there's something in operation in the background, keeping track of where objects are around you and changing your movement pattern so that you don't get hit. Um, and when I was studying that, when I was studying especially the facial expressions involved in protecting people from impact, I spent a lot of time staring at video and pictures and frame by frame at people's faces and other animals' faces in moments of flinching. And what I realized was these flinching facial movements are really similar to emotional expressions, and especially to smiles and to laughter and to crying. And so then the question became, why? What's the link there? Is there some kind of weird evolutionary past? Um, and and I think there is. Yes, I think that you know a smile evolved originally from a cringe, right? A cringe basically says, "I'm not threatening because I'm scared." Right? And if I'm not threatening and I do this and you look at me and you say, oh, he's not threatening, well, that can evolve into a gesture, a social gesture where I say to you, I'm friendly, I'm not threatening. And so it evolves into the smile, which has the crinkly eyes and the upper lip pulled up. And that's a kind of weird modified form of the same reaction that animals gave if you threw a rock at their face and they gave a big squint cringe reaction. So it kind of morphed and evolved into a smile. And that's what that a line of work was about, was this really interesting a set of connections between uh, emotional expressions and uh, and defensive behavior. The kind of cringing, flinching behavior that's reflexive that we make when something whacks us in the face.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I could see that because you watch some athletes like LeBron or like a Floyd Mayweather. They're pros, but even still, sometimes when they're in the middle of a fight or something and they get hit, you could see the reaction on their face when they play it in slow motion.
Yep.
So it's kind of like they never fully get used to it. But
No, that's a reflex. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, now I was on Wiki. I know sometimes it could be accurate or inaccurate, so I wanted to ask you about some of the contributions that you have made. Now, what is AST?
Right. AST is the attention schema theory. It is a theory of how consciousness is constructed, what it is. It's a theory that, in a nutshell, says that our brains build a self description, a simplified self description. And when I say I'm conscious and I have experience and I'm this and I'm that and I have a mind inside of me, this is all down to my own brain's self model or self description, and it's a very specific kind of self model. And so there's this whole theory that it has been called AST, attention schema theory, and um, it's in some ways different. So there's a whole range of theories out there of consciousness. Like some say, oh, this causes it. Some say that does. Some say, you integrate enough information and poof, it kind of just becomes conscious. And some theories say, no, what happens is information gets into a particular part of the brain and then poof, it becomes conscious. And there's other theories. There's theories that say, nah, everything's conscious anyway. Every rock and every pebble and every planet, and it's called panpsychism, which is very hard to prove or disprove. So it's really not a scientific theory. It's a bit woo-woo, but there are lots of these different theories out there, right? Um, and AST is a little different because I would say all the other theories have a little pinch of magic in them, right? In order to work, you have to assume magic. Like, well, the information in your brain percolates around and then it gets to this spot and then the magic happens and then you're conscious, right? So all of them have some element of magic. AST does not. AST is a prescription for how to build it. It's a very specific prescription for how you could engineer it. And for this reason, AST has become very, very popular in artificial intelligence these days, because these people who study artificial intelligence, I've heard this lots and lots of times from talking to people who work on this and collaborating with them. They're interested in the question of consciousness. But when they look at the literature and they look what people are doing, they say, well, we can't build this. This is magic. We don't know how to build magic. Like, we can build this part, but why would magic come out of it? And if it did, what good does it do us? Like, we want something concrete that we know that we can engineer and build that will have a benefit that can actually make the machine work better. And then they look around and they say, okay, here's a theory, AST, that actually is exactly like that. It's buildable, it's engineerable. Each step makes sense. It doesn't rely on magical thinking. And so AST has kind of expanded quite a bit in popularity in that world of computer technology. And so I think there are a number of groups that are working on that, including our own, trying to understand what that means. Can you build artificial consciousness, and is that good or bad? You know, is that beneficial, or is that kind of a risk? And so these are things that really, really interest me these days.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, that sounds like a movie. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. Let me see. Okay, now I wanted to ask you about the primate brain and code and personal space. I think you kind of mentioned it a little bit, but in your role as well.
So yes, I started to talk when you asked me about the smiles, the relation to the facial expressions and smiles and laughter and so on. So that emerged out of other work that, as I said, I had done on um, how sensory input gets translated into movement output, especially for protective movements, to cringing and flinching and this sort of thing. Well, what we did was this was in the 90s, actually, the very late 80s and all the way through the 90s. I studied these. parts of the brain that process the space right around the body. This is called peripersonal space. It's like a bubble or a buffer zone around your space that people tend to try to keep clear of threats. And so we're always monitoring that space using special machinery in the head, and it feeds right into our movements so that it changes how, you know. So, for example, I'm sitting at a desk right now, and I can move my arms around. But one thing I just automatically never do without having to think about it, I never move my arm so that the edge hits the edge of my desk. Like that hurts if you do that by accident. Bam. That doesn't happen. Why? Because there's this machine in my head that's constantly keeping track of where objects are and adjusting my ongoing movements so that I don't do that. Right. So it's a protective mechanism that's keeping track of the space near the body. And we studied that for quite a long time, a little more than 10 years. And I think that has had a large impact. I mean, there's a whole multiple fields now in psychology or neuroscience that are sort of use that as a foundation. Um, and it turns out it's not just um, protecting yourself from, I don't know, getting hit by objects, but it turns out also this space, this protective space, is at the foundation of social interaction, right? Because we have a personal social space. We don't like other people getting into our personal social space. And so this same mechanism plays a huge role in shaping how people get along with each other socially. Um, the sort of geometry of how people talk to each other. And of course, everyone's sense of personal space, social space, got severely deranged during the COVID pandemic, um, because people weren't in physical proximity to each other anymore. And so everyone had to adjust and then readjust back again at the end of COVID. And there was a lot of really interesting work on the social implications of personal space. So my work was mostly on the brain mechanisms, the underlying brain mechanisms behind this kind of processing the space near the body.
Wow, that's true. I can relate, and I guess the world can relate. But like you say, readjusting, that's been a struggle for me, I must admit. But I'm glad you said something. You said you spent 10 years, working on this. Sometimes a lot of people, take it for granted. When the research is done and we can utilize these things to improve our life, we don't realize how much work has been done by people like you. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I find it's about 10 years to do a really deep dive into a topic, um, at least to the point where I run out of ideas and I can't make any more headway. And then I've done what I can, and it's time to move on to another topic.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So yeah, we're about 30 minutes in. I want to thank you so much for coming on the platform. And again, I truly appreciate the work you're doing. I got to brush up and, check out some of your books. I did check out some of the TED Talks. It was very interesting. And I want to thank the viewers for tuning in. It's been a phenomenal episode of Taye Speaks.
Well, I have enjoyed it very much.
All right, all right. Take care now.
All righty.